Thank you for joining us for this Prairie Tales podcast. Our wagon train to the past is taking us to the prairie in 1871. We will be stopping for a few nights in Newton, Kansas, which at the time was called the wickedest part of hell. This episode is sponsored by BJ and Kim Staley, who are the owners of Bud and Steve Auto Service at 1201 North Main in Newton. The shop is located just one block from where the old Chisholm Trail crossed Sand Creek. A big shout out goes to them for their support of Prairie Tales.
You know, when we think about the Wild West, we often picture those iconic gunfights in dusty streets.
The classic image.
But beneath that romantic image was a real intensity, a hair-trigger environment where even a minor irritation could explode into deadly violence.
Absolutely. Things could escalate incredibly quickly.
Take a figure like John Wesley Hardin. I mean, a notorious gunfighter, legendary quick draw, and a temper that could just ignite in an instant.
Yeah, definitely had a short fuse.
And that brings us to a surprising precursor, maybe even the very first recorded instance of what we'd now call road rage. And it involves Hardin way back in 1872 on the Chisholm Trail.
Road rage in 1872, wow.
Yeah. Apparently some folks were riding a bit too close for his liking, and that seemingly small annoyance ended up costing 5 lives. Pretty stark, right?
It certainly paints a vivid picture of the era. What's fascinating here is how readily personal grievances could escalate to such extreme violence.
Especially in a setting where formal law enforcement was often absent or, stretched really thin.
Exactly. This wasn't just about individual tempers. It reflected a time and place where the means for lethal conflict were easily accessible, and established ways of resolving disputes peacefully were still developing.
Exactly. And that intense environment of the early West, where tempers flared and violence was commonplace, provides the backdrop for a particularly striking incident that unfolded a bit earlier.
Okay.
This was in the spring of 1871, near a place that would soon become Newton, Kansas.
Ah, Newton. So we're focusing in there.
Right. Imagine this. Early April, 1871. Harvey County doesn't exist yet. We're talking about wide open prairie, scattered Indian settlements, just a few hardy individuals trying to make their way.
So really frontier land.
Oh, yeah. This is 74 miles west of Emporia, which at the time was considered the very edge of established settlements. And in this barely touched land, something significant is about to happen near the future site of Newton.
That sheer remoteness is crucial for understanding the context, isn't it? The lack of established courts and law enforcement meant individuals often felt, compelled to take matters into their own hands.
To protect themselves, their property.
Right. This naturally led to a situation where personal interpretations of right and wrong and the willingness to enforce those interpretations with force were paramount.
Right. Now, just a few days later, get this. On April 7th, 1871, the Republican Daily Journal out of Lawrence, Kansas, ran a small item.
Okay.
Announcing that this place called Newton was poised to become a major railroad hub, a speculative boomtown in the making.
Ah, so the railroad's coming. Change is on the horizon.
Imagine the anticipation, the sudden influx of people, all with their own hopes and, potentially conflicting interests pouring into this still largely unsettled area.
It's that transition period, isn't it? From open prairie to organized settlement. That's often where you see these kinds of tensions and violent outbreaks boil over.
Yeah, exactly. The decline of the truly wild frontier meeting the beginnings of established commerce and communities.
And the old ways of self-reliance and settling disputes with force are still prevalent, but the new legal and social structures aren't yet fully formed or, universally accepted.
Precisely. So our mission today, our deep dive, if you will, is to unpack the details of what appears to be the first recorded road rage incident in Kansas, possibly even the entire United States, which occurred just south of this soon-to-be town of Newton in early April 1871.
And this led to a death.
It resulted in the very first known murder in the future Harvey County. And what's fascinating is that our primary account of this comes directly from the man at the center of it all, John Wesley Hardin.
From his autobiography.
Yep, from his autobiography.
Okay, so Hardin's account, Obviously, it's going to be shaped by his own perspective, his motivations. We have to keep that in mind.
Of course, it's his version.
But it still offers valuable insights into the mindset and the realities of the time. It's a compelling firsthand look, for sure.
Okay, so Hardin recounts leaving Park City with his cattle herd, heading towards Abilene. He mentions being on the Newton Prairie.
Right, near the future town.
And encountering a herd of Mexican drovers right behind him. Now, this wasn't just a casual trailing situation. These Mexican cattle were pushing so aggressively into Hardin's herd that it took 2 or 3 hands just to keep them separated. You can almost feel the irritation building, right?
Yeah, and the potential for chaos. Yeah. Plus, the economic realities of a cattle drive played a role here, too.
How so?
Well, a mixed herd could lead to all sorts of problems, spread of disease, disputes over branding, just the sheer difficulty of sorting them out later.
Oh, okay.
So Hardin's concern about his herd being crowded wasn't just personal annoyance. It had very real practical and financial implications.
That makes sense. So Hardin says the boss Mexican became angry with him for holding his cattle back.
Right. Blaming Hardin.
And Hardin, in his typically direct manner, told him to move to the outside of the trail, pointing out that he didn't have to follow so closely. It's like telling someone tailgating you on the highway to just go around.
Hey, yeah. And just like modern road rage, this perceived slight just escalates the situation.
Totally.
The boss Mexican doesn't just get annoyed. He gets all the matter. He drops back, stops guiding his herd.
Uh-oh.
And predictably, without anyone leading them, the Mexican cattle surge directly into Hardin's.
So Hardin then has to physically turn them off to the left. You can imagine the added work and frustration.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
So the boss Mexican then rides back up to Hardin, and this is where it really turns dangerous.
Yeah.
He starts cursing at Hardin in Spanish.
Yeah.
And threatens to kill him with a sharpshooter as soon as he can get it from the wagon.
Wow. So it goes from argument to death threat just like that.
Instantly. This is no longer just a verbal spat.
Yeah.
It's a clear, lethal threat. And what's even more chilling, about 5 minutes later, Hardin sees him returning.
With a gun. Man, the speed of that escalation is striking.
It really is. Yeah. A minor inconvenience on the trail leads to a death threat and grabbing a firearm. It highlights that ever-present potential for violence, you know.
No kidding. So the boss Mexican gets within about 100 yards, dismounts, takes aim, and fires. Mm-hmm. The bullet grazes Hardin's head, goes right through his hat, knocking it off.
Whoa. Talk about a close call.
Seriously. And then, get this, the guy tries to fire again.
Yeah.
But his gun malfunctions.
The technology of the time.
Right. These were early firearms, more involved loading process, less reliable than later cartridge guns, especially in a fast fight.
It's almost darkly ironic, isn't it? This unreliable tech playing a role in a deadly showdown.
Yeah. So, with his main weapon failing, the boss Mexican switches it to his left hand and pulls out his pistol with his right.
Okay, backup plan.
He starts advancing on Hardin, shooting as he comes, and calling for his crowd of 6 or 7 Mexicans. It's a full-on assault now.
That shift from a ranged attack to a direct charge that shows serious intent. He's not just trying to scare Hardin anymore.
No way. Just then, help arrives Jim Clements, who had heard Hardin was in trouble.
In timing.
Yeah, but Hardin's own weapon situation wasn't exactly ideal. He was riding this fiery gray horse, apparently. And his pistol was an old cap and ball that he'd pretty much worn out shooting it on the trail.
Oh, boy.
He says there was so much play in it that it wouldn't even fire unless he held the cylinder with one hand and pulled the trigger with the other.
You're kidding. Imagine trying to fight like that. It really speaks to the practical challenges, doesn't it? Maintaining firearms was crucial.
Absolutely. A worn-out pistol puts him at a huge disadvantage here. So he tries several times to shoot from horseback, can't manage it. Then he dismounts, trying to hold his horse and shoot.
Still no luck.
Nope. Finally, Clements yells out some crucial advice. Turn that horse loose and hold the cylinder.
Smart thinking. Focus on the weapon.
Hardin does it, fires at the Mexican, who's now just 10 paces away, and hits him in the thigh. Stuns him.
Okay.
He tries to fire again, but the gun just clicks. It's empty.
Yeah.
And apparently the Mexican was also out of ammo.
So now what?
They both just rush at each other for a good old-fashioned hand-to-hand brawl.
Wow. From gunfire to fists. Intense.
After that, Hardin and Clements retreat to their camp to reload their best pistols.
Regrouping. Smart.
And wouldn't you know it, they get a message from the Mexicans. Time was up and they were coming.
Oh, it's not over.
Not by a long shot. Moments later, the boss, Hosea, whom Hardin calls his old foe, shows up with 3 men on the east side of their position.
Old foe, so there was history there.
Seems like it. Hardin doesn't elaborate much, but calling him that suggests maybe this wasn't just random road rage, but maybe part of some ongoing feud.
That adds another layer, doesn't it?
Yeah.
These things weren't always isolated incidents. Could be ongoing power struggles.
Right, so Hardin, having switched horses, rides out to meet him. Hosea fires first from about 75 yards away, but misses.
Lucky break for Hardin.
Definitely. So Hardin decides to charge. He turns his horse loose and rides straight at Hosea, firing as he comes.
Aggressive move.
He says the first shot did the work, hit Hosea right through the heart. He describes Hosea falling over his saddle horn, pistol still in hand, blood pouring from his mouth. Grim stuff.
Yeah, very grim. Hardin's decisive action. It underscores his reputation, doesn't it? Deadly efficient.
No hesitation. The remaining Mexicans keep shooting, but they don't charge. Hardin and Clemens are too quick for them.
They press the advantage.
Hardin says a few more well-placed bullets silence the party forever. He claims he killed 5 men in total and his cousin got 1.
And 6 men dead. Overcrowded cattle.
Started as an argument over cattle, escalated to a deadly confrontation, leaving 6 people dead, right there on the Newton Prairie. It's sobering.
It really is. That stark, brutal outcome highlights the extreme consequences of seemingly minor disputes when the rule of law is weak and firepower is the final word.
Now, while this violent encounter on the Newton Prairie is a dramatic example, it wasn't the only significant event unfolding around this soon-to-be town in spring '71.
Okay, there's more happening near Newton.
Yeah, another incident also involving violence that would later connect back to Hardin. We're talking about a drover named Juan Bideno.
Juan Bideno. Okay, another name from the era. It's important to remember the early West was full of these individual stories of conflict, right?
Absolutely. And Bideno's experience, while separate at first from Hardin's prairie fight, reflects those same underlying tensions, the ready availability of lethal force.
So what happened with Bideno?
He was herding cattle from Texas up to Abilene. Somewhere along the way at the Cottonwood River, a dispute arose. Apparently, he was reluctant to cross.
Common issue on cattle drives.
And it quickly turned violent. Bideno ended up killing the 22-year-old trail boss, a guy named Billy Coron.
Killed the trail boss. Wow.
Yep, and then he fled south. Now, Bideno himself had a reputation as a fast gun.
Okay.
And reportedly, in this instance, he was actually trying to go straight, but clearly things went terribly wrong.
That story again. Trying to escape a violent past and a place where reputation and defending yourself were everything. Hard to do.
Very hard. Now, connecting Bideno's story back to Hardin, there's a report that Bideno was later killed by none other than John Wesley Hardin.
Oh, their paths cross eventually.
And sure enough, Hardin recounts pursuing Bideno after learning about Coron's murder. He says prominent cowmen urged him to go after Bideno.
Right. Community pressure.
They secured a warrant for Bideno's arrest, and incredibly, Hardin himself was even appointed a deputy sheriff for the pursuit.
Get out. The guy involved in that prairie shootout just weeks before is now a deputy.
I know. Talk about a turn of events.
That really highlights the fluid and often contradictory nature of law enforcement back then, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Justice was often about who had the will and the firepower.
Sometimes relying on individuals with their own violent histories.
Exactly.
So Hardin and a man named Jim Rogers set off after Bideno. They planned to swap horses as needed, apparently common practice on the open range during a pursuit.
Keep the pace up.
Their goal was to catch Bideno before he could reach the Nation, that's Indian Territory, present-day Oklahoma area.
All right, different jurisdiction. Harder to catch him there.
Or escape all the way back to Texas. They rode hard, covering about 50 miles to reach Newton by 4 p.m.
Back near Newton again.
Yep. There, they joined up with Billy Coron's brother and another man named Hugh Anderson. Now they're a posse of 4.
Okay, reinforcements. The determination is clear. This network of cowboys and cattlemen often played a big role in maintaining their version of order.
Right, absolutely. Especially without a strong, formal legal system. So they continued towards Wichita, changing horses again near a herd, bossed by a man who, get this, would later become the assistant superintendent of the Huntsville Penitentiary.
Small world on the frontier.
Isn't it? They reached Wichita, having traveled 100 miles by 11 p.m. and rested until morning.
That's a hard ride.
Their strategy was to search the cattle herds south of Wichita for any information on Bideno. Finally, they hit pay dirt.
Yeah.
They encountered a Mexican herder who reported that Biden had stayed at his camp the previous night and had traded horses.
Okay. A fresh lead. That reliance on local knowledge, talking to people along the trail, was absolutely crucial for tracking fugitives then.
Vital. So, with renewed hope, they set off again. They got word from another herder who'd seen Bideno heading south.
Closing in?
They pressed on to Cowhouse Creek, learned Bideno had changed horses there just about an hour before them.
Oh, they're right behind him now.
From there, they made a run for Bluff Creek, right on the Kansas Indian Territory line, swapping horses yet again. The tension must have been immense.
You could feel it. That relentless pace, constantly changing horses. They were determined.
As they approached Bluff Creek, the road forked. Anderson and Hardin decided to go right through the small town.
Okay.
Rogers and Corrin took the other fork, planning to meet up on the other side. But before Anderson and Hardin had gone too far, they got crucial information.
What was it?
Bideno had just arrived in Bluff, unsaddled his horse, and was asking about a restaurant.
Whoa. Right there.
They immediately fired their pistols into the air, the signal for Corrin and Rogers to turn back.
That detail about him asking for a restaurant.
Yeah.
It's so ordinary amidst the manhunt.
Yeah, it really is. So, Bluff was a small place, maybe 50 houses, a few saloons, restaurants. They decided to ride in like typical cowboys, hitch their horses, then split up.
Cover more ground.
Hardin and Anderson went into a saloon that was just before the restaurant Bideno was supposedly in. Hardin ordered drinks, quickly checked the place out.
Sizing things up.
And casually asked if they served dinner and if a Mexican herder was eating in the back. The answer was yes. So Hardin quietly told his partner, Anderson, to be ready with his gun.
Okay, the moment of truth is coming. Their strategic approach shows this wasn't just reckless vengeance, right? They had a plan.
They did. They stepped into the entrance of the restaurant, and there he was, Juan Bideno, sitting at a table, eating.
Just like that?
Hardin, pistol still holstered but ready, addressed him directly. Bideno, I am after you, surrender. Said he didn't want to hurt him if he complied.
Giving him a chance.
Apparently. But Bideno, sitting there, just shook his head, frowned, dropped his knife and fork, and reached for his own pistol.
Ah, so he wasn't surrendering.
No. Hardin repeated his demand, put your hands up. But as Bideno drew his gun, Hardin fired across the table, hit him squarely in the forehead, killed him instantly.
Wow. Swift and brutal. Reflects the deadly efficiency both men were known for, I guess.
Yeah.
Despite the offer to surrender, it turned lethal the second Bideno went for his gun.
Yeah, exactly. Corrin and Rogers rushed in then, and Corrin, understandably overcome, wanted to shoot his brother's killer again, even though Bideno was dead.
Oh, man. Grease and rage.
Hardin physically stopped him, but Corrin did take Bideno's hat as a grim souvenir.
Understandable in a way. The waiter.
Terrified, Hardin told him to just leave. Then Hardin and his companions went back to the saloon. The bartender offered them free drinks, maybe just relieved the trouble was over. Hardin then went outside, addressed the small crowd that had gathered. He explained everything, Billy Corron's murder, the pursuit, the demand for surrender, how Bideno drawing forced his hand. He even introduced John Corrin.
How did the crowd react?
According to Hardin, they commended their actions. And Hardin, in a final act, gave $20 for Bideno's burial.
Interesting. The public support, the explanation, it gives a glimpse into the social norms, you know? Yeah. Swift, sometimes violent. Justice was often accepted, even expected.
Seems like it. So they began their journey back to Abilene via Wichita, rested briefly there after an incredible 150-mile ride in just 36 hours.
Exhausting.
During the ride back, Hardin apparently shared his earlier troubles in Abilene, specifically the run-in with Wild Bill Hickok.
Ah, yes, the snoring man incident and his escape.
Right, and they all agreed to stick together when they reached Abilene for safety. It's also worth noting, Bluff City was also known as Sumner City at the time.
Okay, names were fluid back then. And Bideno?
Yeah, he was indeed considered one of the fastest guns in the West, sometimes a hired gun, but also, as we said, reportedly trying to change his ways when he killed Corrin.
A complex figure, like so many from that era.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we've explored two really significant violent episodes. Both happened in close proximity geographically around this emerging settlement of Newton, and temporally right there in the spring of 1871.
You have Hardin's explosive road rage incident on the prairie just south of where Newton would be.
Right.
And then his relentless pursuit and killing of Juan Bideno down in Bluff City.
Both events powerfully illustrate just how chaotic and dangerous the early West was, especially around these new growing settlements.
Absolutely. Disputes, whether it's over cattle or actual murder, could just ignite into deadly violence so fast. Rule of law was weak, personal firepower often felt like the only recourse.
Exactly. And seeing these two stories unfold around the same time, same general area near Newton, it highlights how the drive for land, resources, even just perceived personal slights, fueled this incredibly volatile environment.
These weren't just isolated incidents. They were part of the fabric of life on that frontier.
Yeah. This period of rapid development, the influx of all these different groups into places like Newton, it undoubtedly created a powder keg atmosphere.
Where personal conflicts and the pursuit of justice, however you define justice, often played out in these really dramatic final ways.
Which brings us to a final thought for you, the listener, to consider. What does this convergence of violent events around the nascent town of Newton in 1871 really tell us about the forces shaping the American West and about the individuals who had to navigate that dangerous, rapidly changing landscape?